I was home one night, alone in the house, while my parents and my brother were at my brother's baseball game. I wasn't into sports, so I decided to stay home and play video games. But as I sat in my quiet room, I began to hear a faint knock on the door downstairs. It was strange, because we had a doorbell. I thought it might be someone just mistaking our house for someone else's. But then I heard the knock on the back door as well. I made my way downstairs to investigate. I peeked through the window, but I couldn't see anything. I walked down the hall towards the back of the house, and when I reached the back door, I saw him. An older man with a gray beard and flannel shirt was standing on our back porch. He saw me and immediately tried to convince me to let him in. But I wasn't born yesterday, so I refused. He looked like an average everyday person, but there was something in his eyes that made me feel like he was hiding something sinister. As I turned around to walk away, he called out to me,
"I know you're alone in there."
Suddenly, he began to pound on the door, trying to break it down. I panicked and ran back upstairs, locking myself in my dad's office. I could still hear him trying to break down the door, but I managed to grab the phone and dialed 911. The operator answered, and I could barely get the words out. My voice was shaking with fear. The man was still trying to break down the door. I could hear his grunts and the splintering of wood as he put his full weight into it. The police arrived quickly, but the man had already fled. My parents were relieved when they got home and heard what happened. They were scared for my safety, but grateful that I had managed to keep myself safe. The man was caught and arrested the next day. I knew I had narrowly escaped a dangerous situation, and it made me realize the danger that can come from the most unexpected places. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak and groan of the house made me jump. I kept thinking about the man and how he tried to break into my house. I couldn't understand why he had targeted me and why he had come to my place. The police had assured me that it was just a drifter, someone who was wandering the streets and had picked my house at random. But something about that didn't sit right with me. The next day, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I did some digging on my attacker. I found out that he had a criminal record, mostly petty crimes, but there were a few more serious offenses. I knew that there was something to this man's attack. It felt too personal, too targeted. I started to search for news articles, looking for any connection between the man and my family. And that's when I found it. It was about a robbery of a local business. The man had been arrested for holding the store clerk at gunpoint. The store was only a few blocks from my house, and I found out that my mother was a witness in the attack. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This man had targeted my house because of my mother. He had recognized her and come to take revenge for being caught and arrested. I couldn't believe that my family had been put in such a dangerous situation because of a random act of violence a few years ago. I immediately called the police and shared my findings with them. They were shocked and promised to look into it further and provide us with any extra protection. But the damage had already been done. My family and I were left to deal with the aftermath of the attack. We were constantly looking over our shoulders, paranoid that the man would come back for us. My parents decided to install a security system, and we started to be more cautious about who we let into our home. We also started to carry pepper spray, and I put a panic button app on my phone. The incident left a deep impact on me. I started to have trouble sleeping, and I would often find myself checking the locks on the windows multiple times before going to bed. My parents tried to reassure me that we were safe now, and that the man was in custody, but the fear was still there. It's been a few months since the incident, and although the fear has subsided, it's still there, lurking in the back of my mind. This experience has taught me to never let my guard down, and always trust my instincts. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind you would see in an old horror movie. I was a boy of 10, home alone for the night while my parents were out of town. I had begged them to let me stay home alone, promising that I'd be responsible and not break any rules. As the night went on, I started to regret my decision, though. The wind howled outside, and the rain beat against the windows. I tried to keep myself occupied by watching TV, but every time a commercial came on, I heard strange noises coming from outside. I tried to tell myself that it was just the wind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that somebody was watching me. I decided to go to bed early, hoping that the storm would pass, and I'd be able to sleep through the night. I climbed into bed and pulled the covers over my chin, but I had the feeling that there was somebody in the house with me. I heard strange whispers and footsteps, but when I turned on the light, there was nobody there. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination, but the feeling of being watched was too strong. I was sure there was someone in the house, just outside the door. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I was too scared to move, too scared to even breathe. Just when I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard a sound, and it sent chills down my spine. It was the sound of someone trying to turn my doorknob. I lay there frozen, as the doorknob slowly turned, and then it creaked open. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping that if I couldn't see it, then it couldn't see me. But then I heard it. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps coming closer to my bed. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted upright in my bed and screamed, "Who's there?" But there was no answer. The footsteps stopped, and the door closed, making a large bang. I sat there shaking for what felt like hours. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare go to the door to see if someone was really there either. In the morning, I told my parents about the strange noises and the footsteps, but they laughed it off as my imagination. They said that the storm must have just made the house creak, and that I was probably dreaming. But I knew what I had heard, and I believed that there was someone there that night watching me. From that night on, I never felt truly alone. I would hear strange noises and see shadows moving in the corner of my eyes. I never found out who or what it was that night. Everyone thought it was just my imagination, but I know it was real. I grew up in a typical suburban neighborhood. The streets were lined with identical houses, each with manicured lawns and white picket fences. My best friend was a boy named Joey, who was a year older than me and lived a few houses down. Joey was a bit of a troublemaker, always getting into mischief and causing trouble. But I couldn't help but be drawn to his charismatic personality and adventurous spirit. One night, I sat alone in my house, and there was a knock at my door. It was Joey, and he was accompanied by two older boys. They introduced themselves as Dave and Colin, and they looked to be a few years older than Joey. I let them into the house, feeling a bit uneasy, but wanting to fit in with the older guys. Once inside, Dave and Colin made themselves at home, lounging on the couch and helping themselves to snacks from the kitchen. I tried to make conversation, but they didn't seem too interested in talking. Instead, they began to argue amongst themselves, their voices growing louder and more heated. Suddenly, Dave pulled out a knife. I froze in shock as Dave and Colin began to fight. They were rolling around on my living room floor. I could see blood, but I didn't know who it was coming from. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. Just as I thought things couldn't get any worse, Joey stepped in. He grabbed the knife from Dave and helped me kick them both out of the house. They refused to go to the hospital, and neither of them wanted to call the police. I was left to clean up the mess they had left, and my mind was racing with fear and confusion. I scrubbed the blood from the floor and tried to put the living room back into order. I was really scared that my parents would find out, and I'd get in trouble. I realized that sometimes the people who you allow into your life can surprise you in the worst ways. From that day on, I made sure to choose my friends more carefully, and never put myself in such a dangerous situation again. I was around 12 years old when my parents started leaving me home alone without a babysitter. It was really exciting at first to have the feeling of freedom, but something really scary happened one time. My parents were out one evening, and I was alone watching TV in the living room when I heard the phone ring. I picked it up but there was no one there, just silence. As soon as I hung up the phone, I heard the doorbell ring. I slowly walked over to the door, but I wasn't going to answer it. I just wanted to check who was there. When I got there was nobody. Just then, I heard the back window smash. I froze. After my initial shock wore off, I ran out the front door and down the street to my friend's house. Once I was safe, I called my parents, and they called the police. My parents came home as soon as they could, and the police were already there. They searched the house, and we learned that we had been robbed blind. The police officers told us that the person who broke in must have known that I was alone. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. Every time the phone rang, or someone came to the door, I would jump. I had nightmares about that break-in, and I would wake up in a cold sweat. My parents told me that I was safe, but I was still scared. One day, my parents received a phone call. It was the police. They had caught the person who broke into our house. They said it was someone who had been watching the neighborhood and must have seen my parents leave. He knew I was home alone, and then he saw his chance to break in. I was relieved to know that the person was caught, but I was still really scared all the time. I was no longer excited about being home alone, and for about a year after, my parents started hiring a babysitter again. But it wasn't long before I was too old for a babysitter, and from then on, I always made sure to keep my guard up. I arrived home one day after school. No one else was there. It was a nice spring day, so I left the main door open, but just the screen door was closed and unlocked. I grew up in a small town, so crime was pretty much non-existent for break-ins. I put my dog on his leash in the backyard so he could do what dogs do, and then I went back inside. I sat on the carpet in the living room watching TV. When a commercial break came on and the TV screen went blank, I saw a large figure right behind me. My anxiety went through the roof. My heart sank to the bottom of my stomach, and my throat tightened up. It was hard to breathe when I first noticed the figure. Even though it was merely seconds, time seemed to slow down. As I turned my head, several thoughts went through my head. Why didn't my dog bark at the intruder? Right, he's tied up outside. With my head half turned towards the intruder, I could see in my peripheral vision that it wasn't a person, but a black animal. Then I was thinking that a bear had entered my home and was going to attack me. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. I was fully looking at the animal, and to my relief, it wasn't a bear. It was my neighbor's dog. He was panting and giving me a puppy smile. Oh my God, I was so relieved. He must have gotten free, and since I didn't fully latch the screen door, the big mutt was able to just push the door open, and he wandered in. I walked him over to my neighbor, and we laughed about the incident. But I'll never forget that moment of terror. Thankfully, it was the best case scenario, and I always latched the screen door closed after that.